Chapter 21. I did not take Rontu with me when I left the cave that night, and I closed the opening so that he would not follow me, for if the Aleuts had brought their dogs, he would surely smell them out. I went quietly through the brush to the headland. Before I had climbed to the top of the high rock, I could see the glow of the Aleut's fire. They had camped on the mesa at the place of the spring they had used before. It was less than a half a league from my cave. I stood for a long time watching the fires, wondering if I should move to another part of the island, perhaps to the cave where the wild dogs had lived. I was not afraid that the men would discover me, because they had worked on the beach and hunted in their canoes all day. It was the girl I was afraid of. The ravine was tangled with brush, which was hard to walk through, but in the ravine grew seeds and roots. Sometime when she was out looking for food, she might wander by the spring and see that it was being used and find my steps leading to the cave. I stood on the rock until the Aleut fires died. I thought of everything I could do, of the different places I could go, or at last decided to stay in the ravine. The far end of the island had no springs, and if I moved there, I would have no place to hide the canoe, which I might need. I went back to the cave and did not leave until the moon was full. There was little food left. Rontu and I climbed to the headland, and when we passed the house, I saw that the 3 of the whale ribs had been cut from the fence. No one was there, or else Rontu would have barked. I waited until the tide was low, which was close to dawn, and filled a basket with seawater and abalones. We were back in the cave before it grew light. The seawater kept the abalones fresh, but when we had to go out again, the night was too dark to find our way to the reef. I therefore had to gather roots. I could never gather many more than the sun rose, so I went out every morning until the next moon came. Then I went to the reef for abalones. During all the time I saw none of the Aleuts, nor did the girl come near the cave, though I found her footsteps far down the ravine where she had been to dig roots. The Aleuts had not brought their dogs, which was fortunate, for they would have found Rontu's tracks and followed us to the cave. The days were long for Rontu and me. At first he would pace up and down the cave and stand at the opening sniffing through the cracks. I did not let him out except when I was with him, for fear he would go to the camp and not come back. After a while he got used to this and would lie all day and watch whatever I was doing. It was dark in the cave even when the sun was high, so I burned the small fish I had stored. By their light I began to make a cormorant skirt, working every day on it. The 10 skins I had taken at the tall rock were now dry and in condition to sew. All of them were from male cormorants, whose feathers are thicker than those of females and much glossier. The skirt of yucca fibers was simple to make. I wanted this one to be better, so I cut the skins carefully and sewed them with great care. I made the bottom first, putting the skins end to end, and using 3 of them. For the rest of the skirt, I sewed the others along their sides so that the feathers ran one way on the upper part and different along the way the bottom. It was a beautiful skirt, and I finished it on the day after the second moon. I had burned all of the little fish, and since I could catch no more until the Aleuts left, I took the skirt outside to work on it there. I had found footsteps in the ravine twice again after the first time, but no closer to the cave. I had begun to feel safe, for the winter storms would soon be here, and the Aleuts would leave. Before another moon, they would be gone. I had never seen the skirt in the sunlight. It was black, but underneath were green and gold collars, and all the feathers shimmered as though they were on fire. It was more beautiful than I thought it would be. I worked fast now that it was almost finished, yet from time to time I would stop to hold it against my waist. "Rontu," I said, feeling giddy with happiness, "if you were not a male dog, I would make you one too. As beautiful as this." Rontu, who was sprawled out at the mouth of the cave, raised his head and yawned at me and went back to sleep. I was standing in the sunlight holding the skirt to my waist when Rontu leaped to his feet. I heard the sound of steps. It came from the direction of the spring, and as I turned quickly I saw a girl looking down at me from the brush. My spear rod beside the mouth of the cave, within easy reach. The girl was not more than 10 paces from me, and with one movement I could have picked up the spear and thrown it. Why I did not throw the spear I do not know, for she was one of the Aleuts who had killed my people on the beach of Coral Cove. She said something, and Rontu left of the mouth of the cave and walked slowly toward her. The hair raised on his neck, but he walked to where she stood and let her touch him. The girl looked at me and made a motion with her hands, which I took to mean that Rontu was hers. "No," I cried, and shook my head. I picked up my spear. She started to turn, and I thought that she was going to flee back through the brush. She made another motion, which I took to mean that Rontu was now mine. I did not believe her. I held the spear over my shoulder, ready to throw. "Tutak," she said, pointing to herself. I did not say my name. I called Rontu, and he came back. The girl looked at him, and then at me, and then smiled. She was older than I, but not so tall. She had a broad face and small eyes that were very black, and when she smiled I saw that her teeth were worn down from chewing seal sinew, but they were very white. I was still holding the cormorant skirt, and the girl pointed to it and said something. It was one word, "Winsha," which sounded like a word that means pretty in our language. I was so proud of the skirt that I did not think. The spear was in my hand, but I held up the skirt so the sunlight would shine all of it. The girl jumped down from the ledge and came over to me and touched it. "Winsha," she said again. I did not say the word, but she wanted to hold the skirt, and I gave it to her. She put it against her waist and then let it fall from her hips, turning one way and the other. She was graceful, and the skirt flowed around her like water, but I hated the Aleuts, and I took it from her. "Winsha," she said. I had not heard words spoken for so long that they sounded strange to me, yet they were good to hear, even though it was an enemy who spoke them. She said other words I did not understand, but now as she spoke and she looked over my shoulder toward the cave, she pointed to the cave and to me and made gestures as if she were making a fire. I knew what she wanted me to say, but I did not say it. She wished to know if I lived there in the cave so she could come back with the men and take me to their camp. I shook my head and pointed to the far end of the island, away, for I did not trust her. She kept looking toward the cave, but she said nothing more about it. I held the spear, which I could have thrown. I did not, though. I feared she would return with the hunters. She came over to me and touched my arm. I did not like the feel of her hand. She said more words and smiled again and walked to the spring and drank. The next moment she had disappeared in the brush. Rontu did not try to follow her. She made no noise as she went. I crawled back in the cave and began to pack the things I owed. I had all the day to do it because the men were working and would not return to their camp before night. By nightfall, I was ready to go. I planned to take my canoe and go to the west part of the island. I could sleep there on the rocks until the Aleuts left, moving from place to place if I needed to. I carried 5 baskets up the ravine and hid them near my house. It was getting dark and I had to go back to the cave for 2 that were left there. Carefully, I crawled through the brush and stopped just above the mouth of the cave and listened. Rontu was beside me, and he listened also. No one could go through the brush in the dusk without making a sound except someone who had lived in it for a long time. I went past the spring and waited, and then onto the cave. I felt that someone had been there while I had been away. They could be hiding in the dark, watching me. They were waiting until I went into the cave. I was afraid, so I did not go in, but quickly turned around. As I did, I saw something in front of the cave on the flat rock I used for a step. It was a necklace of black stones of a kind I had never seen. Chapter 22. I did not go into the cave, nor did I take the necklace from the rock. That night I slept on the headland at the place where I left my baskets. At dawn I went back to the ravine. There I hid myself on a brushy ledge. It was near the spring, and from it I could see the mouth of the cave. The sun rose and shone through the ravine. I could see the necklace lying on the rock. The stones looked blacker than they did in the darkness, and there were many of them. I wanted to go down to the cave and count them to see if they would make 2 loops around my neck, but I did not leave the ledge. I stayed there all the morning. The sun was high when Rontu barked, and I heard steps below me. The girl came out of the brush singing. She walked to the cave, but when she saw the necklace lying on the rock, she grew quiet. She picked up the necklace and put it down again and peered into the mouth of the cave. 2 of my baskets were still there. Then she went and drank from the spring and started off through the brush. I jumped to my feet. "Tutak!" I cried, running down the ravine. "Tutak!" She came out of the brush so quickly that she must have been waiting nearby to see if I would return. I ran to the rock and put on the necklace and turned around for her to admire it. The beads were made not 2 loops but 3. There they were long and oval instead of round, which was very hard shape to make and takes much skill. Winsha, she said. Winsha, I said after her, the word strange on my tongue. Then I said the word that meant pretty in our language. Wintai? She said and laughed, because this was strange to her. She touched the necklace, giving the word for it, and I gave mine. We pointed out other things, the cave, the spring, a gull flying, the sun and the sky, Rontu asleep, trading the names for them and laughing because they were so different. We sat there on the rock until the sun was in the west and played this game. Then Tutok rose and made a gesture of farewell. Mane? She said, and waited to hear my name. Wanapele, I answered, which, as I have said, means the girl with the long black hair. I did not tell her my secret name. Mane. Wanapele, she said. Pese no? Tutok, I replied. I watched her go through the brush. I stood for a long time listening to her footsteps until I could hear them no more, and then I went to the headland and brought the baskets back to the cave. Tutok came again the next day. We sat on the rock in the bright sun, trading words and laughing. The sun went fast in the sky. The time came soon when she had to leave, and she returned on the day that followed. It was on this day when she was leaving that I told her my secret name. Karana, I said, pointing to myself. She repeated the word, but she did not understand what it meant. Wanapele, she said, frowning. I shook my head, pointing again to myself. I said, Karana. Her black eyes opened wide. Slowly she began to smile. Pese no Karana, she said. That night I began to make a gift for her in return for the necklace she had given me. At first I thought I would give her a pair of my bone earrings, but remembering that her ears were not pierced and that I had a basket of abalone shells ready flaked in the thin disc, I set about making a circlet for her hair. I bored 2 holes in each of the discs using thorns and fine sand. Between them I put the 10 Olivia shells, which were no larger than the tip of my little finger, and threaded them all together with sinew. I worked 5 nights on the circlet, and on the 5th day when she came I gave it to her, putting it around her head and tying it in the back. Winsha, she said, and hugged me. She was so pleased that I forgot how sore my fingers were from boring the holes in the hard shells. Many times she came to the cave, and then one morning she did not come. I waited for her all that day, and at dusk I left the cave and went to the ledge where I could watch the ravine, fearing that the men had learned that I lived here and would find me. That night I slept on the ledge. The night was cold with the first wind of winter. Tutok did not return the next day, and I remembered that it was near the time when the Aleut hunters would leave. Perhaps they had already gone. That afternoon I went to the headland. I climbed the rock and crawled across it until I could look over the rim. My heart beat loud. The Aleut ship was still there, but men were working on the deck, and canoes were going back and forth. The wind blew hard, and a few bales of otter skins lay on the shore, so probably the ship would leave at dawn. It was dark when I got back to the ravine. Since the wind was very cold and I was no longer afraid that the Aleuts would find me, I made a fire in the cave, and I cooked a supper of shellfish and roots. I cooked enough for Rontu and me, and for Tutok. I knew Tutok would not come, yet I put her food beside the fire and waited. Once Rontu barked, and I thought I heard the sound of footsteps, and went to the opening and listened. I waited a long while and did not eat. Clouds moved from the north, covering the cold sky. The wind grew louder and made wild noises in the ravine. At last I closed the mouth of the cave with stones. At dawn I went to the headland. The wind had died. Fog lay over the sea, washing against the island in gray waves. I waited a long time for a glimpse of Coral Cove. And finally the sun burned away the fog. The little harbor was deserted. The Aleut ship, with its red-beaked prow and red sails, had gone. At first, knowing that I could now leave the cave and move back into my house on the headland, I was happy. But as I stood there on the high rock looking down at the deserted harbor and the empty sea, I began to think of Tutok. I thought of all the times we'd had sat in the sun together. I could hear her voice and see her black eyes squinting closed when she laughed. Below me, Rontu was running along the cliff, barking at the screaming gulls. Pelicans were chattering as they fished the blue water. Far off I could hear the bellow of a sea elephant. But suddenly, as I thought of Tutok, The island seemed very quiet. Chapter 23. The hunters left many wounded otter behind them. Some floated in and died on the shore, and others I killed with my spear since they were suffering and could not live. But I found a young otter that was not badly hurt. It lay in a bed of bull kelp, and I would have paddled by if Rontu had not barked. A strand of kelp was wound around its body, and I thought it was sleeping, for often more than they could go to sleep and anchored themselves in this way to keep from drifting off. Then I saw there was a deep gash across its back. The otter did not try to swim away as I drew near and reached over the side of the canoe. They have large eyes, especially when they are young, but this one's were so large from fear and pain that I could see my reflection in them. I cut the kelp that held it and took it to the tide pool behind the reef, which was sheltered from the waves. The day was calm after the storm, and I caught 2 fish along the reef. I was careful to keep them alive because otter will not eat anything that is dead, and left them in the pool. This was early in the morning. That afternoon I went back to the pool. The fish had disappeared, and the young otter was asleep, floating on its back. I did not try to treat its wounds with herbs because salt water heals, and the herbs would have washed them away anyway. I brought 2 fish every day and left them in the pool. The otter would not eat while I was watching. Then I brought 4 fish, and these also disappeared, and finally 6, which seemed to be the right number. I brought them whether the day was calm or stormy. The otter grew, and its wound began to heal, but still it stayed in the pool, and now when it came, it would be waiting for me and would take the fish from my hand. The pool was not big, and it could have easily gotten out and away into the sea, yet it stayed there and slept or waited for me to come with some food. The young otter now was the length of my arm and very glossy. It had a long nose that came to the point and many whiskers on each side and the largest eyes that I've ever seen. They would watch me all the time I was at the pool, following me whatever I did, and when I said something, they would move around in a very funny way, in a way, too, that made pain come to my throat because they were gay and saddened also. For a long time I called it Otter, as I had called Rontu Dog. Then I decided to give the otter a name. The name was Monini, which means little boy with large eyes. It was a hard task catching fish every day, especially in the wind, if the wind was blowing and the waves were high. Once when I could catch only 2 and drop them into the pool, Monini ate them quickly and waited for more. When he found that was all I had, he swam around in circles looking at me reproachfully. The waves were so high the next day that I could not fish on the reef, even at low tide, and since I had nothing to give him, I did not go to the pool. It was 3 days before I could catch fish, and when I went there again, the pool was deserted. I knew that he would leave someday, but I felt bad that he had gone back to the sea, and that I would never catch fish for him again. Nor would I know him if I saw him again in the kelp, for now that he had grown and his back had healed, he looked like all the others. Soon after the Aleuts had left, I moved back to the headland. Nothing had been harmed except the fence, which I mended. And in a few days, the house was the same as before. The only thing that worried me was that all the abalones I had gathered in the summer were gone. I would need to live from day to day on what I could catch, trying to get enough on the days when I could fish to last through the times that I could not. Through the first part of the winter, before Monini swam away, this was sometimes hard to do. Afterwards, it was not so hard, and Rontu and I always had enough to eat. While the Aleuts were on the island, I had no chance to catch little smelts and dry them, so the nights that winter were dark, and I went to bed early and worked only during the day. But still I made another string for my fishing spear, many hooks of abalone shells, and last of all earrings to match the necklace Tutok had given me. These took a long time, for I searched the beach many mornings when the tide was out before I found 2 pebbles of the same color as the stones in the necklace, and soft enough to cut. The holes in the earrings took even more time, for the stones were hard to hold, but when I was done and had rubbed them bright and fine sand and water, and fastened them with bone hooks to fit my ears, they were very pretty. On sunny days I would wear them with my cormorant dress and the necklace, and I would walk along the cliff with Rontu. I often thought of Tutok, but on these days especially I would look off into the north and wish that she were here to see me. I could hear her talking in her strange language, and I would make up things to say to her and things for her to say to me.